Ready? So camera interruption there. Part 2. These are the 3 areas of my dissertation that I studied in the literature review. Innovation, organizational culture, and general systems theory. So the method of my study, I set up a qualitative study where I had a semi-structured interview process. And I went to seek the answer to the question, what is the culture of innovation? How do you foster an organization that is ongoingly improving itself, looking for ways to innovate constantly? That was the core of the idea. Our qualitative analysis means that I'm going through and asking questions to find a data set that really can't be statistically analyzed at this present time. So I'm asking people's opinions, feedbacks, their experiences about these ideas. The semi-structured interview process means that I believe it was like 10 core questions. But if the interviewee wanted to go and add on to the questions, I would let them divulge the information. I would take that information into consideration too if it wasn't like exactly corresponding to my question. And then lastly, I'm trying to find these relationships between these 3 areas. What are the relationships from organizational culture to the systems and the innovation approach? So I selected 60 candidates to participate in this study. I sent them a formal letter with an overview of what was going on and all of the confidentiality clauses that were in the IRB. With that, 25 of the 60, or about 41%, said, hey, yes, this is something that I consider myself to be an expert in, and I want to participate in your study. These 60 people that were asked, they come from various backgrounds: for-profit, non-profit, social sector, large global conglomerations to 2 or 3 people in an entrepreneurial startup. So they were all over the board. However, I did say that they had to be in a leadership role, leading innovation for at least 3 years. And that innovative strategy, it could have failed or been wildly successful. And I allowed it to be both because, in my opinion, failure to innovate is just a wealth of learning for kind of the next orbit of innovation. So I didn't determine whether or not it was a success or failure. If they wanted to participate because they led innovative techniques over the last 3 years, I allowed them to do so. So what are the questions that I asked? I asked these questions. I took an appreciative approach, which you probably talked about in class, asking the positives, trying to really pull out their strengths in this area. So the first is, what innovations are you as an organization most proud of? Trying to get them to tell their stories of success right off the bat. And that allowed that conversation to focus in a time where they felt that they had truly been innovative. And then next question was, how does it reflect your greatest strength in innovation? So kind of teasing it out to, what about this success story? What are these elements of innovation in that success story? Then I asked them to take kind of a external perspective into their organization, saying, what in your culture, so those norms, behaviors, artifacts, and languages, what in your culture supports the innovation that you're trying to foster? So that next question, I asked them, let's list out the culture. Tell me about what are the items in the culture. And what was interesting is when I brought up some of the granular elements of culture based upon Shine's work, the interviewee simply asked, oh, that's a great idea. Why hadn't we thought about that? And in my mind, I didn't tell them anything. I was simply asking the question for them to think about innovation holistically throughout their culture, not just one area. The next question was about aspiration. What was their most compelling reason to aspire to be innovative? And oftentimes we got things like financial means, competitive market, the kind of common things. But when you kind of pulled it back and asked them more questions, We got things like employee engagement, motivation, retention rate. So it's really interesting kind of the level of breadth of understanding of continuous innovation aspirations. The next is strategic initiatives that's supporting your innovative techniques, and I asked them to tie into some of the high-level visionary thinking at the organization. What are the 10 things that your CEO is setting aside that say these are what we need to accomplish in the next year, and how did that fit into an innovative strategy within that idea? The second to last question was really interesting because I asked them, how do they know when they're successfully promoting innovation? What does it feel like? How do you know when you're truly getting there? When is innovation ongoing? What does success look like? And that was an interesting question for them. And then lastly, I asked them to identify the resources that would supply the fuel to kind of move continuous innovation forward. So you can think of these of, oh, you know, we allow them to have brainstorming time. Well, some of them got real creative in their responses of saying, you know, we allow them to job shadow others or spend time with other companies or even give them 10% of their work week to do something that really ignites their passion. And it may or may not fit exactly into their job, but it allows them to be kind of more human, like well-rounded with work and life. So it was really interesting, the resources outside of what you commonly think of financial means and things like that. So those were the questions that we asked. So after going through this, and I'm sure you'll do this in your studies, you take the data set and then you code it, and you're looking for trends. How often did this response occur? And what about that response can be kind of grouped together? Well, I started grouping my data set together and found 3 major areas and then 8 minor areas. So they're kind of like families of this idea of continuous innovation, being able to couple them together. So this is probably this is a better illustration of this, and we'll talk through this really quickly. And this is the last point that I wanted to talk to you about today. So the first element was found is change management, which is primarily what I believe your class to be about this section. So change management is the idea of leadership, whether it be servant leadership, power leadership, position leadership, just a strong element of leadership that is tied to setting a vision of innovation. The second element is the ability to cooperate and trust effectively. You know, if I come up with an idea that is so far outside the box, is my team going to ridicule me? Am I listened to by the other counterpart that might have a different perspective? So the ability to cooperate and trust that I can let myself be vulnerable and work in a gray area, or what we talked about is that creativity side. The last in this idea of change management is the capacity to change. How much change, how fast can the organization take the shock of these change interventions? So for, like Kurt Lewin says, you know, change has to be unfreeze, freeze, freeze. And that is the ability to say, okay, we just have to take a moment and pause and say the change can't be constant. It has to, the organization has to take a breath and have some sort of sense of normalcy. It just depends on kind of where is the barometer of how much change that organization can react to. So that's the element of change management. The second quadrant that we're going to talk about ties into that literature review that I did with general systems theory. So the thinking of the whole as the sum of its parts. And the first thing in general systems theory is economic influence. And you can think about that as your physical department, internal, or perhaps the economic environment, external. Any type of financial factors or economic development areas that are influencing the way you make decisions or how quickly you respond in a market. So the idea of economic influence. The second in general systems theory is strategic planning. How often do we lump like the R&D innovation team